أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today could very well be the very last day of the month of Ramadan, depending what part of the world you are in. Or maybe tomorrow would be the last day, completing 30 fasts of this blessed month of Ramadan. Whatever the case may be, as we continue and we begin to conclude this series of Ramadan reflections for our third year in our theme of living the Qur'an through the living Qur'an. Today we want to turn our attention actually to the Qur'an and how the Qur'an itself speaks about the Qur'an. Obviously this is something which we should have been thinking about from day one of this month of Ramadan. But obviously as we continue through these verses, we have reached to this conclusion in this verse of appreciating the Qur'an from how Allah Himself describes this glorious book. Before we go on into the description that God gives, let us review this verse and come back and try to analyze it very briefly to better appreciate the Qur'an via the Qur'an.
كتاب أنزلناه إليك مبارك ليدبروا آياته وليتذكر أولو الألباب.
Behold, this Qur'an is a great book which we have revealed to you, full of excellences, so that these people may ponder over its verses, and so that those gifted with pure understanding may take heed. This month of Ramadan has been about the Qur'an. In fact, when God introduced the month of Ramadan to us in Surah Al-Baqarah, chapter number 2, He actually told us that the month of Ramadan is that month in which the Qur'an was revealed, a guidance for humanity, and a clear criterion, and a distinguisher between guidance and realities. This Qur'an, which we have been looking at over the last 29 days, and which I'm sure we've all been reading in our homes or our religious centers, has been revealed not just to be recited in the month of Ramadan. Indeed, we know when the Prophet Muhammad, may God's peace and blessings be upon him and his family, introduced the month of Ramadan to us in the end of the month of Sha'ban, in that very famous sermon which he delivered on a Friday before the month of Ramadan. He told us that to recite one verse of the book of God in the month of Ramadan, the reward would be equivalent to reciting the entire Qur'an in any other month in the year. And so obviously we gather to recite the Qur'an, but as a community of believers, we have to appreciate that the true worth of us as individuals is commensurate to how much importance we give to the Qur'an in our day-to-day lives. If Ramadan is about the Qur'an, if Ramadan is the month in which the Qur'an was revealed, if Ramadan is when God wanted us to devote more time to His book, then we have to appreciate that it's not just time devoted to reading the book. We need to do tadabbur on the Qur'an, as this verse speaks about. Tadabbur being to reflect, to contemplate, to think about the verses of the Qur'an. Now we're not saying that each and every one of us should become a commentator, a mufassir of the Qur'an, and write multi-volume commentaries of what the Qur'an means, to explain its nuances and to elaborate on the particulars of the Qur'an. No, that's not the point. The point is that the Qur'an should not just be read. The Qur'an should not just be a app on our smartphone. The Qur'an should not just be a amulet which hangs on our rear view mirrors or decorates the walls of our house or our screensavers on our computer. No, the Qur'an has been given to us by God, His Word, to think about, to reflect, to read, to understand, and to implement within our lives. When God speaks about reflecting on the Qur'an, He brings forth some very powerful passages. For example, He says in one verse, what is wrong with the people? Do they not reflect and think about the Qur'an? Or are there locks upon their hearts? God is asking us, is our spiritual heart, is it locked? Is it encased in some unpenetratable metal? Or is there room for us to actually read the Qur'an and think and reflect on it? Sometimes God tells us that we have a rust built up on our heart. Just like you may have a garden utensil, you may have, a shovel or something which develops a coating of rust over top of the metal, and it begins to erode at that metal. Sometimes our hearts become like that. And God tells us that we have to polish our heart. And that can come about through recitation of the Qur'an, contemplation, and obviously ultimately is the application of the Qur'an in our day-to-day life. As this has been a month of reflecting on the Qur'an, and this theme that we have been presenting is living the Qur'an through the living Qur'an, let me conclude this session today with one verse of the Qur'an and one saying, one statement from the infallible leaders of this faith. The verse comes to us from Surah Qur'ān, chapter number 25. Near to the end of the verse where God proclaims, and He says, وَقَالَ رَسُولٌ, that the messenger of God will say, Ya Rabb, O my Lord, إِنَّ قَوْمِ اتَّخَذُوا هَذَا الْقُرْآنَ مَحْجُورًا. Indeed, my community took this Qur'an as a playful thing, as a trivial pastime. This is a very powerful verse if we sit and deliberate and reflect on it, that our messenger, the beloved mercy to the universe, will complain to God on the day of judgment that his community, us, the Muslim community, that we neglected the Qur'an. We threw the Qur'an behind our backs and we did not give it attention. Yes, we read it very beautifully. We memorized the rules of recitation. We would recite the Qur'an when a person would pass away. We would read the Qur'an at a wedding. When the bride and groom would leave to go to their new home, they would walk under the Qur'an. We see today that people wear clothing, paraphernalia, caps, t-shirts with verses of the Qur'an emblazoned on it. Even, unfortunately, some people go to the extreme maybe of even tattoos with verses of the Qur'an or passages that they find beautiful. All of this pales in comparison for why the Qur'an was revealed, which is for us to think and reflect and to understand and implement the Qur'an in our day-to-day life. And this is what the Prophet will complain about to God on the day of judgment, that we did not give the Qur'an its due reverence and respect. We close with a tradition from the fourth Imam, Ali ibn Hussein Zainul Abidin, may God's peace and blessings be upon him, in which he has a very beautiful, very poignant saying. He says in the tradition that if everything from the east to the west, meaning everything in creation, was to be annihilated, and he was to remain on earth alone, he says, I would not feel alone or lonely as long as the Qur'an was with me. Those are very powerful words. Can we say the same thing? Can we say that, if our friends weren't there, our family wasn't there, if there was no internet connection, if our satellite TV wasn't working, can we say that we would be, comfortable just with the Qur'an with us? Our fourth Imam is showing us that if everything in existence were to be destroyed on earth, but only he remained and the Qur'an was there, he would be okay with that. We should be at a level to have that level of confidence to be with the Qur'an, to have that close affinity and love to the Qur'an, with the Qur'an. And obviously, and we'll end with this, that the Qur'an is not just meant to be read, but is meant to be reflected and thought about and to understand and implement its contents within our day-to-day life. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.